Welcome to the Radically Genuine Podcast. I am Dr. Roger McFillin. The American food system is poison, and I'm not being hyperbolic. I mean, they have built a machine that takes the most nutrient-dense and bioavailable foods, milk straight from the cow, eggs from the pasture, meat from the animal that actually walks on the grass, and they've propagandized it. They've led us to believe that it's unhealthy, and they criminalize the safe production and distribution of this food. They send armed agents to seize it. And then they turn around and they sell you the fake. The powder, the seed oils, the pasteurized, the processed, the engineered in a lab imitation of real food. We are poisoned, and we experience the predictable consequences of that poison. They steal the real and they sell you the fake. And then they act shocked that we're the absolute sickest nation in human history. Diabetes, obesity, autoimmune disease, kids with allergies and asthma at rates that did not exist 2 generations ago. So let's ask the uncomfortable questions today. If food is medicine, and it is, then what do you call a system that makes the healing foods illegal and the sickening food cheap, subsidized, and everywhere? That's not incompetence. It's not an accident. At some point, you have to ask whether this is a targeted attack on our health, our sovereignty, the life force within us. This is an anti-life agenda. And who profits when an entire population is just kept sick enough that you need them, where you're just sick enough where the life force that is within you doesn't allow you to stand up against authoritarian ideas, where you become just sedated enough to not care. My guest today has been on the front lines of this battle for food freedom. She stood with the farmers facing down the agencies. She's documented how this war is actually being waged, and she's not afraid to name names. We're going to ask the questions that you're not going to get in the mainstream media. If you're not exposed to this alternative information, you're going to be propagandized that this is conspiratorial. You're going to have a fear reaction to some of the statements we make today, not because it's true, because you've been conditioned to fear it. You have beliefs and you have thoughts about human health that are inaccurate, that are lies. This is going to be bigger than raw milk, much bigger than raw milk. But that's going to act as a catalyst today for all areas of an attack on our health. This is about who controls your body, who controls your health, your rights to eat real food. I want to welcome Tracy Thurman to the Radically Genuine Podcast.
It's such a pleasure to be here.
This is personal for you because of your own health history.
It is. It is. Raw milk for me has never been something that's theoretical. It's always been something that transformed my life, and therefore I believe other people should have the right to try this for themselves as well.
So what happened to you that you had to go down this route to seek out foods that can heal you?
Well, when I was 20 years old, I suffered a severe vaccine injury. The Gardasil vaccine prior to the COVID vaccine was the shot with by far the most adverse events in the VAERS database, the government's own database. And that one destroyed my life. So I was 20 years old. My doctor told me simply that there's this vaccine that you should take that will prevent you from getting cancer. Not what type of cancer, not only a few strains of a specific pathogen that could potentially cause you to get cancer. Not there are myriad other ways to avoid getting this potential pathogen. None of that. Just there's a vaccine that will prevent you from getting cancer, and you should take it.
Did you ask any questions?
I didn't know to. At that point, as far as I knew, doctors knew everything, and you just trust them. I learned the hard way that that is not the case.
Yeah, I think we've all been brought up to just surrender that to the doctor. So imagine that type of statement. How does a doctor who is administering that vaccine come to that conclusion?
It's a great question. I don't even know, looking back on it, whether she realized how inaccurate her statements were. I think there was nothing ill-intentioned on her part. She may have, I have no idea what she could have assumed, because I don't want to think ill of her in any way. I think it was so unthought through and so offhanded that there was no seriousness given by many of these professionals when they give out these drugs. It's like giving out candy. They don't consider the possibility that there might be negative side effects, that there might be a downside to what they perceive as the upside. And so I don't think she thought this through any more than probably the 30th patient she gave it to that week.
Yeah. So what happened to you?
Well, at that point, it was a 3-dose regimen over 6 months. And with each dose, I got progressively sicker, but I had no idea vaccines could cause any kind of issue. And so it didn't occur to me, even though the time correlation of my injury was so tight. After the first one, I started to become quite tired, had a lot of difficulty staying awake in the office. After the second one, I started to lose consciousness if I would stand up. So I would pass out. My heart would start running at over 200 beats a minute. I'd pass out on my keyboard in the office. After the third one, I essentially couldn't stand up. And by this point, we already knew there was something wrong. They were taking me in and running tilt table tests, which is where your heart rate is monitored. You're attached to what is essentially a board strapped to it, and you're moved from horizontal to just shy of standing, strapped to this board, and then your heart rate and blood pressure are monitored. And in that situation, in between 3 and 12 minutes, depending on the time they did it, my blood pressure would disappear and my heart would stop. And they would have to put me back down to horizontal in order that I lived.
Did they tie it back to the Gardasil vaccine?
No, nothing was tied back to that at all. It was just, this is a baffling thing that has happened to you, but that happens to girls sometimes in their teens. This is what I was told, that it was just a thing that happens to some teenage girls, and you won, you lost that lottery.
Yeah, this is how I question the scientific legitimacy of our current medical institutions, because they tend to attribute benefits post-intervention, but then they deny the harm that occurs post-intervention, right? So to be truly empirical is to measure all and identify all potential variables. And the manner to which medical professionals will deny that their drug or their intervention caused harm is baffling to me, because it leads me to believe that they are more attached to the idea that they have medicinal interventions without consequence, without negative consequence. And they just cannot fathom the idea of iatrogenic harm. It's almost like, because you get in these conversations, I've had doctors sitting right there in front of me who look at me like I have two heads. Like, there's no way the drug can lead to suicide or homicide. There's just no way. And that's part of this brainwashing of the medical system and their training, their education, which is so influenced by industry.
Yeah, it took me years to figure out what had happened. It was a tough time because, I had been accepted to an Ivy League school. I was about to finally begin my life. I didn't have parents in a position to pay for anything. So I was on my own, and I had managed to get into an Ivy, was, about to begin a career, and all of that was destroyed. They put me on a treadmill to try to see if I could maintain blood pressure and a reasonable heart rate. And within 3 minutes, they yanked me off it because, as I said, I was well over 200 beats a minute, which is dangerous territory for a heart attack. And then they even put in a pacemaker. I was awake during the procedure, so I'm lying there on the table watching this pacer be implanted into my heart. And then because they needed to know, would it work for me? Would I be able to sustain? And then they strapped me back to one of these boards, had me stand up on it. And honestly, it was worse than my heart stopping, because now my heart was beating, but it was beating empty. So I'm starting to have seizure-like activity. I can't see. I can't hear. I'm just in raw adrenal terror of my body trying to stay alive. But I can't lie back down. And I'm trying to get out the words, put me down, put me down. I'm vomiting. It was terrible. And then after, and they told me afterwards, my blood pressure was not measurable. And my heart was beating because there was an electrode in it forcing beats to occur. But it was essentially beating empty. So they lay me back down. The doctor comes in. She's standing over me. Like, it's bright light behind her head. And I just remember, my ears are just, they're ringing. My vision is still kind of black and white. I'm just coming back online. And I just remember her telling me, I'm sorry, you're completely disabled. You're going to have to go on to disability because there's really nothing more we can do. And those are hard words to hear when you're 20 years old.
Do you remember how it landed, how it affected you emotionally?
In that moment, I was still coming off the adrenaline rush of, my body trying to stay alive upright and during this tilt table test. And it took a couple days before it started to sink in at all, what I had been told. And I believed it. I believed they were right because my body had fallen apart. To not be able to stand up and stay conscious as a 20-year-old, to suffer serious brain fog. They thought I was narcoleptic. I was falling asleep so much. And so they put me in a sleep study. And in this sleep study, they would monitor me all night, and all day for 24 hours. And they found that every time I lay down or had any type of opportunity to sleep, I'd be asleep within about a minute. And I would sleep for up to 18 hours a day. And so I was not narcoleptic, but I was diagnosed as being, pathologically hypersomnolent, which is just the fancy words for needing far, far more sleep than a healthy person would. And it makes it very difficult to have any form of life, as you can imagine. And so as far as I knew at that point, that was my life going forward. And for more than a decade, while I did improve somewhat, I could get out and I could walk a little bit. I could see friends. I did improve somewhat, but nowhere near enough to be able to work properly. I had a mobility scooter that I would have to use if I wanted to go anywhere in, more than, a few hundred feet. I would use a mobility scooter. And that's a tough reality when you're in your 20s, when all your friends are in college, going to beach in Mexico on spring break, and you are done. As far as the medical system is concerned, you are finished.
So there's a couple reflection points here that I think are important. The first one is the medical professional herself does not assume responsibility for disabling you with a Gardasil vaccine. Therefore, it does not get reported through the VAERS system, which is that reporting system. So folks, when you hear data on the harms of vaccines and the VAERS system itself, understand that is significantly underreported. Because
I don't believe my case is in VAERS at all.
It won't be, because they didn't attribute your condition to the Gardasil vaccine. So we so flippantly throw out data as if it's truth. And I think it's part of the propaganda to say these conditions are rare. And this is how medical professionals make decisions. They say, do the potential benefits outweigh the potential risks? Well, when the risks are not understood and they're not communicated to the patient, informed consent is violated. And your informed consent was violated when you were provided this Gardasil vaccine. The second important point is they are now creating in consciousness an idea of who you are now and who you will be in the future. So they create the idea you are disabled. Again, there is no actual understanding of how consciousness can impact the body, the role of prognosis in the development of disease. So they don't say, people can overcome this. I believe in your God-given ability to heal. I believe in God. We don't know it now. Don't give up. We're going to find a way to restore your health. No, they tell you you're disabled for life. They create the condition. And as you sit here today, healthy and being able to have this conversation, it's just a reflection back to the audience about the harms of our current paradigm and how we often discuss our medical system as if it is the pinnacle, a high level of ethics and scientific validity. And we don't discuss openly and honestly how unscientific it is because we cherry pick from the material. So this is a tragedy, and others have been down this exact road where they're not told they were harmed by the medical system, whether it's a drug, whether it's a vaccine, and they assume something about themselves. I'm curious to know how you thought about your own body and your own health at that time in your life.
I believed them when they told me that this was an untreatable condition that I was going to have for the rest of my life. Nothing in my body told me otherwise. My body seemed to be quite broken. And so I accepted it. I accepted what they told me. It didn't occur to me that maybe they were wrong. Never occurred to me. And during these 6 months before, while I had been getting sicker and sicker, I had been trying hard to function. I'd fall asleep behind the wheel trying to drive to work. I'd fall asleep at my desk. So it wasn't for lack of efforting that I had landed in the situation, and I had simply been getting worse and worse and worse. So I felt broken and believed them when they told me that I was. There was one exception. I went to see a doctor I think it was in Toledo, amazing man, an observant Jewish doctor. And when I walked into his office, I could tell he genuinely cared about me. He pulled out a PowerPoint to teach me about, first of all, he instantly said he intuitively knew what was wrong. And because I was diagnosed, with another collagen disorder that day, which was associated with these other conditions and perhaps making you more likely to suffer the vaccine injury. But he gave me a book that day, he sent it to me after the appointment. First of all, he was very loving, very kind in the appointment. And afterwards, he wrote me a personal handwritten letter and mailed it to my house along with the book, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People, which is written by a Jewish rabbi. And I remember reading that and feeling like this is not my fault, which I hadn't realized until that moment that I thought it was my fault and that I had internalized that sense of it being my fault. And so just having a doctor that approached it, he didn't even tell me, you can get over this. He didn't even tell me any of those things. He just showed me love. And to have someone who just was warm and cared and wasn't just a professional who was there doing his job for 12 and a half minutes and getting out the door meant the world. But the fact that that was the highlight, in a sense, of my medical experience is telling.
I just finished my book, and one of the areas of research for me was on the outcomes of doctor-patient interactions just like that. The power of love, of a doctor who is warm, who is caring, and who treats you like a human being and not a test subject, but also supports personal agency and the belief in your ability to heal. The outcomes are dramatically better. Also, of course, the time that you spend with your patient influences outcomes.
I think he spent at least an hour with me, at least an hour.
Yeah. It makes you consider the system that we've created. Well, not we, the system that's been created, which has turned into profit medicine, where it has dehumanized the interaction between the doctor and the patient. And now we're going down this road of dehumanizing it more by implementing AI. Everyone becomes a data point. And we were talking earlier how the data points are skewed. When you have a sick population, what is normal, what is in the quote unquote healthy range is skewed and distorted. So you have sick people who are just told by their medical professionals that your labs are in the normal range. Who would want to be normal in this day and age? We are a sick population and only getting sicker. But this conversation today isn't about the darkness, in my opinion. We have to tell this story just for context, because you're not here necessarily as someone who's recovered from illness. You're here because you've been on the front lines of this fight. But before you ended up at Amos Miller's farm, which is the story today, I'm really interested to know in some of the things that you did to heal and why food as medicine was necessary for you in this recovery process.
So my injury was when I was 20 years old, and when I was about 30, I ended up making a deal with the divine. I can get into a little detail on it if you want me to.
Yeah,
but,
fascinated.
I've
heard this story before, by the way, from lots of people who've made the deal with God, and it's put them on a path. So I think this is an interesting part of the conversation on how your life plays out. So
I was at that point an avowed atheist. I had lost any faith I had. Was on the working with organizations that were not just atheistic, but anti-theistic, focused on the harms that religion causes. And I was an avowed materialist, but I was plagued by recurring nightmares related to some things from my childhood. And I knew intuitively that they were getting in the way of my well-being, and that I was not going to be a happy person psychologically as long as I was waking up in a cold sweat with my heart pounding almost every morning, replaying the same things from my childhood. So when I was about 30, I was reading, I was a pretty avid reader at that point. I think I was reading How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, which is an exploration of psychedelics, including psychedelics for the treatment of PTSD and similar issues. And I decided, all right, I'm doing this. Now, I was on Social Security disability. I wasn't in a position to afford to go to a clinic, couldn't get into a study, wasn't going to be able to fly to South America and find myself a shaman. So I will be clear that what I did, I am not recommending to others necessarily. But I decided to do 5 grams of psilocybin in a sensory deprivation tank.
Can I pause?
Yeah.
What did you know at that time? Why did you think psilocybin could have been part of this healing journey for you?
I knew that it had been used successfully in larger doses at a single dose, taking a veteran with PTSD or a person with a traumatic history or a smoker and changing the behavior, changing the psychological pattern in a single dose. I knew this was possible.
Yeah.
And then I knew it had been done in studies because I'd read the studies. I'd been introduced to them through Michael Pollan's work. And so I decided to be my own doctor, be my own shaman, and administer this to myself because I couldn't afford to go to one of the places where that was legally able to be done. And I decided to do it in a sensory deprivation tank.
Can I ask why?
I don't know for sure, honestly, why. I knew I was feeling very drawn to the sensory deprivation experience because it leaves you alone with your mind. There is no distraction. So these sensory deprivation tanks, it's like a room you walk into and there's a bath with 800 pounds of Epsom salts dissolved in it, which makes it more buoyant than even the Dead Sea. If you lie in it still, you will be guaranteed to float. The water is heated to exactly skin temperature. The air is heated to exactly skin temperature. The room is soundproofed and light-proofed. So once you get in, you hit the button to turn off the light, you close your eyes, you put in earplugs beforehand just to keep it from getting in your ears. And the only sensation you have left if you lie still is smell. That's the only thing left.
What does that feel like?
Having done psychedelics now a few times, I would say it's similar. It's a similar experience to a lower dose psychedelic in and of itself because everything is cut off except your own mind.
So it's almost like you just become pure consciousness.
Exactly.
Like you're kind of like disconnected from the body.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you lie still enough, you won't, you lose awareness completely of your body. And so in that, I did 5 grams and went into that tank. And I set the intention, which I now know a lot more about intention setting, but my intention and my absolute belief going in was that I was going to cure myself of these recurring dreams that were getting in the way of my relationship to my family and people I loved because of their roles in the thing I was spinning on in my sleep. So I believed firmly I was going to cure this for myself and that I was going to do it in a single trip and that I was going to go in and just visualize cutting these connections and it would be done.
When you chose to go in this direction, was there any intention that there could be a physical improvement like from your vaccine injury?
No.
Okay, so you didn't consider that.
Didn't consider that
This was more
at
emotional,
all.
mental.
Yeah.
You just, at this point, just assumed that you were going to have to deal with this health disability for the remainder of your life.
Yes.
Okay.
And yeah, I had no idea that I could improve and could heal. I go into this tank and my grandfather had died about 2 weeks before that. I had not been able to see him in years because I was estranged from my family at the time. Not from my grandfather per se, but he wasn't in a position to choose to see me. I'll put it that way. And so I go into this tank, a materialist atheist with the goal of ending these dreams. And I do the exercise of cutting going in, visualizing this connection in my mind and cutting it and believing firmly that this was going to end this. But some deep part of me wanted to heal on a deeper level, wanted to heal my relationships with the people in my life who had, from whom I was cut off. There was a desire for a much deeper healing. And in this experience, my grandfather showed up. I could see him. He was standing there looking at me. And I knew this, you could experience hallucinations and visuals on psychedelics. And so I thought, okay, well, I mean, of course I'm an atheist, so he wouldn't actually be there. And I thought, wow, like this is a really fascinating projection of my subconscious here. I wonder what he would say if he was actually here, though. And then he started speaking. And the first thing he said to me was, honor your father and mother. And that was the minute my atheism began to drop away, because that was not coming from my subconscious. I had a strained relationship with my family for quite a long time. There was no possibility my subconscious was throwing up, the 10 Commandments in that way. And he continued to speak to me from that point. From there, I had trained myself in advance, knowing, if you resist or try to hold on to anything in a psychedelic experience, you will have a bad trip. That the key is floating down the river of it.
Kind of like life.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing how training yourself for being a psychonaut actually pays off in the real world too. And so I was floating down the river, and I knew there was a potential for experiencing what is called ego death, which is where the part of the mind that controls the sense of I, the sense of self, can be literally turned off by the drug. And that experience can and will feel like dying, and the ego can panic because it can tell it's turning off and will try to convince you that you are dying. And so I knew this was a possibility. I had prepared myself for it, and sure enough, it happened. And so you could feel that existential terror trying to rise, but I had trained myself, let go, float down the river. And so I floated through it. And what I found on the other side changed my life forever. What I found on the other side was, it's honestly hard to describe, but the best way I can describe it was that there was only one thing that exists, and that I had dissolved into it. And that this was a force that is eternal, omnipotent, omniscient, and only love. That was actually the only thing that existed, and that was God. Not a man in the sky, not a being who judges you, none of those things, which is the God I had lost faith in. I had lost faith in the guy in the sky with a beard who judges you and puts you through stuff to punish you for the things you've done wrong. I had completely lost faith in that God. And what I discovered instead was this force. It wasn't an individual, it was a force. And this awareness that I was actually a part of that force, and that it was like an ocean, and I was just a drop in it. And suddenly, in that moment, I realized and felt that what I was experiencing was more real than anything I had ever experienced in waking life. And that this was the truth to be discovered beyond the ego. And I was just dissolved in this. It was the most blissful, ecstatic experience I had ever had. And in that state, I realized I was going to return. My ego would come back online. I would start to believe myself to be separate from this force again. And it was devastating. It was so devastating to realize that. Because when you're separated in that way, when you dissolve out of the ego, you recognize, I am a petty, miserable, insecure little individual with this pile of grievances, and they're going to turn back on when this creature that is the ego that lives in my mind wakes back up. And it was devastating to realize that was going to happen, because it was the greatest joy and peace that existed to be without that.
Do you believe human beings can exist without it?
I think that psychedelics can provide a shortcut for some people to see the potential for it. And I do believe we can get there without, on a permanent level and without psychedelics. I believe there are spiritual masters throughout history that have, but it requires dedication, commitment, and intention to fully see and fully release.
It's so hard to not be identified to the only self that you're known to be up to this point.
Yes, it is.
But your experience was separate from the self. One would say the true I am, pure consciousness, pure love. So what are the fruits of this experience? You get out of that sensory deprivation tank, and then what?
Well, so I'm at this point, what, maybe an hour, 2 hours into not being an atheist. And while I'm in there, before I knew I was going to leave this place and come back. And in that moment, honestly, I wanted to die and stay there. I wanted to not come back. I knew I had to. I knew there were things I was supposed to do. But before I left that state, I made a deal with that consciousness, with that eternal force of love.
Is that God?
Yes. I realized when I became an atheist, it was right that I became an atheist if the thing I was not believing in was this God of judgment. I was rejecting something that I intuitively was right to reject. What I did not see was that actually isn't what God is.
So you made a deal?
I made a deal, and I said, I said to this force, heal me. Allow me to heal. Show me the way to healing. And I will spend the rest of my life giving everything I have for human freedom, human flourishing, for people to live fully, and really for what I experienced there to become available to others.
Was that in your heart even before this? Human freedom, flourishing?
It was. Yeah. It was. I had been concerned for years about, I had been, a libertarian for years before that. I was concerned about authority controlling people's lives, making decisions for them that they should make for themselves. By that point, I was aware of my vaccine injury. And I had major concerns about the role of, the central banks and controlling people, the entire financial system and controlling people. I hadn't yet fully grasped all the issues with the food supply, but I certainly knew that we were eating poison, and that I was already concerned about the pesticides and that type of issue. But that was the deal I made. And then, my ego came back online. I got out of that tank, I showered off and walked out. And you could say, well, was that just an experience she had in her mind? But the fruit answers that question. By its fruits, you will know it. And everyone in my life, my family for certain, will tell you that who I was the day before and who I was the day after that, two very different people, and that I've never been again who I was before that day.
Well, how were you different?
Before that, I had a lot of grievances toward my parents, grievances toward the church I'd grown up in, grievances toward people and systems I viewed as having hurt me. A lot of energy went toward that. And after that, I wrote my parents a letter and simply said, this is me building a bridge from my side of the river. Will you build one from yours and meet me? I told them about my grandfather come to me in a dream, a few years later, before I told them about the psychedelic use. And over the years following that, we rebuilt an incredible and beautiful relationship. And now I would say we are probably one of the tightest knit, most loving families that exist. And we are that because we know what it is to not be that. And we have promised each other nothing's ever going to separate us again. That love is the only thing that's really real between us. So yes, I'm a very different person than I was before I went into that tank.
Okay, let's talk about physical healing, right? So you are vaccine injured, and the ramifications of such injury, they become whole body, whole health consequences, right? And this is what we see in the United States healthcare system, is that we have a whole range of chronic health conditions that have skyrocketed from autoimmune conditions to various forms of like hormonal conditions. We just keep labeling these, but we never really understand the root cause. What are you going to do with the range of health consequences from this vaccine injury? How do you start approaching your life towards restoration of health?
Well, I guess one question is, do we get into the role of SSRIs in all of this or not? But I had been put on an SSRI, not knowing what that was years before that. And that contributed significantly to my overall state. A cardiologist put me on it after I was diagnosed as pathologically hypersomnolent. They wanted to put me on Ritalin or Provigil. And I knew enough about those drugs to say I did not want to go on them. I knew they were habit forming. And so what they told me was, okay, well, instead we have this other drug. It'll just raise your energy, but it's not habit forming. It's been around for 30 years. Excellent safety profile. The only thing it'll do is raise your energy levels a bit.
Again, lies.
Lies. And it was given to me by a cardiologist, so it didn't occur to me, why would I have ever thought a cardiologist was giving me a psychiatric drug? So they put me on Prozac, fluoxetine. And I can't say that my energy levels really went up. I was less sensitive after that. I was less disturbed by things, including my own illness. I was also less joyful. My range of experience just narrowed. What was really disturbing, though, was that my empathy levels dropped too. Before that, I was a highly sensitive, extremely sensitive person. I couldn't watch anything that was remotely violent. If there was any violence in a movie or a TV show, couldn't watch it. I wouldn't listen to music that was, heavy metal, anything like that. I didn't like what it did to me inside. After I took those drugs, I could watch Game of Thrones. I could watch very violent shows and it didn't affect me. Looking back, I can see that it massively impacted my personal relationships and not in a good way either. And so on top of the vaccine injury, I was dealing with an unknown to me SSRI.
Which follows the actual science that we have, is that an SSRI does decrease empathy. Empathy and this neural network of mirror neurons, which allows us to experience another person, their emotions, what they may think, their selective experience, right? And feeling compassion. This gets cut off by a drug and then gets misrepresented as benefit. The idea that feeling less means feeling better. And we're actually in a healthcare specialty and a mental health care specialty that would align with this idea that feeling less is feeling better. And I can't imagine anything more dark, more evil than that, because it is human empathy that allows us to be able to protect each other, to care for each other, where a mother protects an infant, where a father protects a child, where you stand up against authoritarian or evil actions or behaviors, right? Because of your caring for those who are victimized or oppressed. So to disconnect a human being from that emotional experience is walking yourself down a path to becoming less human, more machine-like, right? And that's why I believe that this is much more than just bad science, or the intentions are good. That somehow this idea that the benefits of such a drug can outweigh the harms, that for someone who's really in pain, that you can give something to somebody to take the edge off, is somehow beneficial to the human condition. But I understand, because we're constructed as human beings to avoid pain, seek out pleasure. But in so many ways, like when you're talking about your own sensitivity, and I've been connected to people who are very sensitive throughout my personal life and my clinical career. They're artists, they're nurturers, they're in service of others. That sensitivity, which I always viewed as a superpower, somehow then gets turned around as a symptom of something they can no longer handle. So you go from somebody very sensitive to human pain, which makes you more nurturing, more loving, more caring. And now you're blunted and you're able to actually watch things that you haven't been able to watch previously. How does that change your personality?
There's this effect called the spellbinding effect, where you don't know you've changed. You don't see the change in yourself. You don't recognize it. And in some ways, I remember feeling like it was a freedom because everybody else could do these things. Everybody else could watch these things. And I had viewed it to some degree as almost a weakness in myself, where adults should be able to watch, experience violence and be okay with it. I don't view it that way anymore.
Yeah, I mean, God, my mind's just going on the various things we've become desensitized to. Mm-hmm. And this is why I see the porn industry and making that so easily accessible and so free is such a weapon of war, because you begin to become desensitized to things that are sacred, right? And that's what the drug does too. It desensitizes you to things that should be sacred.
Yeah. I mean, and I have a good friend, Dr. Joe Verone of the Independent Medical Alliance. He has a clinic down in Houston that treats vaccine-injured patients. And he's told me that every single vaccine-injured patient who comes to him has been put on an SSRI. Every single one. Why? Why are they all being put on it? Why were we all being put on these drugs? Is it that we are experiencing pain from having our lives stripped away from us? And the answer to that pain is simply to blunt us to the cage that we have been put in. So we put you in a cage of illness. Here's something to numb you out to that, handed to you by the same system that put you in the cage in the first place.
Metaphorically, we've built a society and a culture that's a cage. So even if you weren't vaccine injured, mm-hmm. it's the same underlying belief system, right? If we hand you this agent, this chemical numbing agent, and we tell you, you're the one who's sick, you're mentally ill for feeling what you're feeling about the cage that you are in, then we take those people who otherwise would start revolutions, mm-hmm. and we make them believe that they're sick. And we tell them it's a better life. Here, watch your Netflix, take your SSRI, and we're going to give you a supercomputer that is going to captivate your brain. We're turning off your humanity. And then in that, you will not be silent enough where you can connect to God, your true self, to wake up. Now, how did you wake up? How did you get out of this cage?
Well, after I made that deal with the divine, I believed I would heal. And it wasn't instant in any way. It was a longer, slower process, but I began to heal. And the first part that healed was my spirit. I began to reconcile with people in my life and find peace with people in my life who had hurt me or from whom I'd been estranged. That was step one. And I think that's actually important because my physical healing followed that.
Mm.
While I was driven by grievance, while I was driven by bitterness, while I was driven by the sense of having been wronged by those, you could call them lower frequency emotions, my body stayed in a far deeper state of disease.
I'm curious. You used the word frequency.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of my audience would certainly identify with the fact that I've thrown out terms like energy and frequency
Mm-hmm.
over the course of my evolution within this podcast. So when you say lower frequency emotions, what do you mean?
Well, if I were to have a chart of emotions with the highest ones, which if we say frequency, think in terms of sound here. The lowest level ones are guilt, shame. Above that, hatred, anger, spite, fear. And the lower ones, you could classify all of them as some form of fear.
Okay.
So if you used fear as kind of an umbrella for those lower level ones, and then the top half of the chart, where the sun starts to rise, is joy, gratitude, peace, love, and then the highest is unconditional love. And that is the frequency that I experienced when I passed the barrier of ego and dissolved into the oneness.
Okay. Well, you said something fascinating. I'd have to rewind it a little bit here. It's almost like you're saying this preceded your health
Mm-hmm.
restoration, almost like you're attributing not anything clearly physical, that there was something almost energetic behind your health restoration.
Yes, I would say that is true. So I had to start healing emotionally and spiritually before my body began to heal. That is true. And I think it takes so much energy to maintain a space of anger, spite, grievance. So much energy goes into that isn't going into your healing. And that it's a state of dis-ease. Like any of us who have experienced those emotions, which is all of us, think about how you feel inside when you are just furious with what someone else has done to you. Feel how tight your muscles get. Feel how tight your chest gets. Feel how your jaw clenches. And then think how you feel when you're holding, your newborn baby or lying in the arms of the person you love. Feel how different those two states are. Seeing your best friend for the first time in months and just giving them a big hug. Think about how different your body feels in those two states.
This might sound heretical, and it does in Western societies, but there is a whole body of scientific research that would support exactly what you're saying, is that when the body is in that state of love and peace, it heals itself. There's also a pretty strong body of research that demonstrates the healing, the emotional healing of conditions leads to the physical healing of the body. And the root cause of some illness is the body at disease, right? The symptoms may vary, can range from cancer to autoimmune to a number of conditions. But what is at its root is actually emotional, like an energy that's been suppressed. And in that energy, emotion, being emotion and energy and motion, those lower frequency almost becomes embedded into the body in some way. And the body, in its attempts to try to seek out homeostasis, symptoms arise. Could be a tumor that is protective. And then the way we view it as pathology, without understanding the whole, as other cultures have, as human beings have evolved over the course of their development, one in nature, right? That we are not separate from nature. In fact, we as energetic beings on a level, maybe a second dimensional level, there's microscopic living beings. Our cells can be viewed as living, our gut flora, right? So we are one with these microorganisms. I think this is necessary for a later discussion. But to take the human being from its environment, out of it being one and connected to the environment, and then to create a system that puts you at war, essentially, with nature, has created unprecedented levels of human dis-ease. And we can put the whole mental illness aspect, dis-ease, right? Depression, anxiety, this fear, right? And then cancer diagnoses skyrocketing, autoimmune, obesity, right? We put the human being in war with nature and we get sicker.
This is so true. This is so true. And I do think that this is why so many people today are in some form of dis-ease, and why I'm so passionate about other people having access to means of bringing themselves back into alignment in the same way that I was able to.
Can we go to the physical part now?
Yeah.
Because I do completely agree with you, because at first, before you even get to the physical, if you aren't able to find some degree of peace, forgiveness, right, then you can't get your body back into that alignment, right? Now, and then the physical part, if you keep ingesting poisons, then you're going to be right back out of alignment. So this is, we have to understand ourselves to be physical and spiritual beings.
Yeah. So this was my physical healing really began to ramp up a few years later. I'd say 2 or 3 years later. And in 2020 is when it really began, and then into 2021. So in 2021, a friend of mine told me to try raw milk, unpasteurized milk, or I prefer the term fresh milk, because honestly, it's just milk, right? We've altered it by boiling it. It's in its natural state as fresh milk. It is what comes out of the cow. But a friend told me to try that it might help me with healing, that healing my gut might help me with my other autoimmune issues that had arisen from this vaccine injury. Now, I had no knowledge of raw milk. All I knew was the propaganda about it. All I knew was that it was very dangerous. You'd probably get listeria or E. coli and get extremely ill, maybe die. That was what I knew. But I was desperate to heal. I wanted it so badly that if you had told me that, cutting off a limb might help me, I would have possibly considered it. I wanted, physical healing that badly. So I decided to start trying this. I got it from a local Amish farm about 40 minutes from my house. And within weeks, I began to improve. I consumed just straight raw milk, but then I switched to raw milk kefir, which was illegal. Pennsylvania does not allow raw milk kefir, raw milk cream, or raw milk butter. Just straight raw milk.
So I'm a criminal right now?
Yes, yes, you are. What's so strange about this is you can produce them for animals, but you can't produce them for people. So there are a lot of people who are apparently identifying as pets.
Meow. Let me jump in there real quick, okay? Because I know there's so many people listening who've just been propagandized on this. What is the difference between a pasteurized milk and raw milk? Just at the
huge difference.
Yeah, let's discuss that.
Huge difference. So there are a ton of bioactive compounds in milk as it comes out of the cow that are all destroyed by heating it. Lactoferrin becomes much less bioavailable. The probiotics that are in there, lactobacillus, all of these things that you can buy expensive pills to get to rebuild your gut, those are present abundantly in raw milk. So are many of the healthy components that are present in your blood, leukocytes, lymphocytes, all of these that are extremely beneficial for your immune system. They're all in there. And that's far from all of it, but there's extremely healthy fats that are then broken down and destroyed by the heating process. And they will rebuild your gut lining. They will help build your immune system. They will down-regulate inflammatory processes in your body. And then glutathione is another big one, which I think is one of the things that helped me the most. The glutathione that is present in raw milk is a potent detoxifier for toxins in your body. And one of the main factors in a vaccine injury is the buildup of toxins in your body that are in the vaccine. In this case, potentized aluminum from the Gardasil vaccine. That was a vaccine, by the way, in the trials. They knew this was going to cause serious and moderate autoimmune injuries in young women who were given this. How do they know? Well, in the test, they gave one arm was truly placebo, saline. One was just the adjuvant, which is the thing to get your immune system to notice the vaccine. And then one was the live the vaccine itself plus the adjuvant. And in both the adjuvant only arm and the adjuvant plus vaccine arm, it was either 2.3 or 2.8% of the young women they gave it to developed new, moderate, or severe autoimmune diseases. That's nearly 3%. It's a huge number of young women being injured. They went ahead with it anyways and released it to market. So, and what that tells you is that it wasn't actually the vaccine itself, the vaccine portion of the shot. It was the adjuvant, the neurotoxin, the potentized aluminum. And this was the most potentized aluminum in any vaccine.
What do they use for the adjuvant?
It was a potentized aluminum. I forget the second. It was like, is it a potentized aluminum hydroxide, I think.
Okay. And how does the body react
It
to that?
views it as a threat and a pathogen and begins to attack it, but can also attack your own cells.
Okay. So again, this is just a little bit of a wake-up call for people. You sound like an anti-vaxxer.
You know what anti-vaxxers don't do? They don't take vaccines and get injured by them.
Yeah.
I'm a pro-vaxxer who learned the hard way.
Yeah. It's such a dumb argument, right? And we're not here to point out the ignorant. We want to educate, and we trust. I mean, we personally just believe in everybody's internal compass. And this is an issue of freedom, because if you're not informed, then you cannot consent. And so here we are. People have been propagandized to view vaccines as you're just injecting a small portion of the whatever the condition is, so your body's natural immunity can create the immunological response to protect you in the future, right? It's just basic biology. You learn it in 9th grade. What's really happening, though?
What's really happening is you're injecting a neurotoxin to get your immune system to panic and notice everything in your body at that time. Now, this is where viewing the human being as a machine is such a problem.
Yeah.
Because this is assuming then that the only thing in your body that you're suddenly hyper alert, 5-alarm fire immune system is going to notice is that one thing that came in the shot, right? That little molecule. That's the one thing your immune system is going to notice. But no, it may notice anything else that is in your body at that point, including your own tissues.
And we bombard the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right. The newborns. We bombard this in the name of science. Now, if you know this information, and what medical school did you go to?
None.
Yeah. And this is, again, my issue when they try to tell people to stay in their lane, which means don't read.
Yes.
Right? Just be a sheep. You're a slave. Act like a slave. Right? We own your body. We own that child. Right? We tell you what you do with your own child. And you know what? We'll investigate you if you fail to provide them our medical care. So you have to be ignorant and you have to follow. You have to follow the rules. You need to be ignorant and you need to be obedient. Okay. And we have an authoritative class that we're going to tell them what they need to know. We're going to punish independent thinking, and we're going to create them as the authority, and you follow the authority. And when you go to a court of law, it is that authority that we're going to make decisions based upon, right? And that's why it's so important to know how our freedom, or the illusion of our freedom, is very much has been. It's not an at-risk situation. You've never had it.
No.
You are free to only the extent in which you will obey by their rules. And then you have a skyrocketing sick population that you're not allowed to tie it back to the interventions in their war with human nature.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
And so 99% of these shows never want to talk about intent. They're not ignorant. If you have that information, if I have that information, and they do it anyway, why are they doing it?
I've been very blessed in the last few years to get to know some of the absolutely incredible doctors who put everything on the line during the COVID years to protect others. The doctors who, like Dr. Ryan Cole, who blew the whistle on the turbo cancers because he ran a large independent pathology lab and is a data nerd. I say that lovingly. And he was noticing this strange signal where suddenly some specific cancers were going way up in the samples. And so he started looking and saying, there's something strange happening here. Why are these specific cancers suddenly far higher in the samples coming into my lab? Looked for what are the commonalities between these people and realized that these were all spiking right after their shots. That's a doctor who decided to simply open his eyes and look at the data. Many, many other doctors who are associated with IMA and these other groups decided to do that too. But if they can do it, every doctor can do it.
What happens to these doctors who actually think independently?
Well, I think this is why so many doctors don't. There's this wise and well-known saying that it's hard to convince a man of something when his salary depends on him not believing it.
Yeah.
And up until the 1980s, many doctors were independent, ran their own practices. It slowly consolidated in the same way the food supply consolidated, where it became a corporate run thing, where most doctors are working for mega corporations in large hospital systems. And for them, if they see this and say something, they will lose their jobs, as many doctors did during that era.
I started the Radically Genuine podcast in the aftermath of COVID. And my brother, and I love him, those who've been with the Radically Genuine podcast since its inception will know Sean was on the other side, and he just could not fathom the idea that this could be intentional. And I believe that there's a lot of good-hearted people out there who they could not fathom this. And therefore, those who bring this up have to be lying, conspiratorial, right? There's something wrong with them.
Right. It's interesting you say that. I also, just skipping ahead with this anecdote, but after I healed, I had an electrophysiologist, an absolutely phenomenal doctor in the Philadelphia area, one of the best in the entire region. And she'd been looking after me for years, had seen me come into all my appointments in an electric wheelchair or scooter because I couldn't walk well. And she'd seen that for years. And one day I walk in and I tell her, I no longer need your care. I'm healed. And she was so thrilled for me and blown away. And she wanted to know what I had done because she wanted to write a paper on it because she had so many patients who were stuck this way for life. And, all these young women suffering. She had told me that she'd had this major uptick in POTS patients. This was in 2022.
Can you let everyone know what POTS is?
POTS is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So postural, the position of your body, orthostatic, blood pressure, tachycardia, your heart rate going way too fast. So it's basically that you change your posture, your blood pressure goes down, your heart rate goes through the roof. and it's very debilitating condition, and it's what I had, and I had such a severe version of it that my heart would stop. But she's so excited that and like wants to write a paper, and she's like, "What did you do?" And I tell her, and I just watch her deflate. And she said I could write that paper, but I'd never get it published.
Yeah. This isn't conspiracy, folks. This is how the system is set up so you don't receive this information. For-profit industries run by exactly the same degree of the same professionals who are placed in this position to protect their bottom line, to protect their industry itself. So you don't get science. You go on to Google and you think, or even AI now, this is a whole dangerous area. You get the approved narrative. It doesn't mean this stuff doesn't exist. This research is being done around the world. If you look hard enough, you can find it. It's a selected, approved narrative. And even when the data doesn't support their narrative, they will alter the title, the abstract, its conclusions to support the narrative. John Ioannidis, who I've mentioned previously on this podcast, said 85 to 90% of conclusions of paper don't actually fit the data. And this is what our doctors are making clinical decisions based on. Let's face it, when you do your Google search, folks, and you think you get the evidence-based narrative here that you think it's science, you're getting a manipulated version of it. And they're controlling the narrative because they know you won't go any deeper than page 1 of Google. That's why, in order for you to escape the matrix, you're going to have to leave convenience.
This is so true.
And they are betting on the fact that your jail cell, your convenience, let me describe what your jail cell has become. Your cushy home that you pay BlackRock for. Netflix, your entertainment, your cell phone that you've become dependent to, where they feed the narrative to, and your doctor on demand, all under the illusion that you're just in this one life and you're happy and you're healthy. Everything's easy, right? Banking's easy. Going to a doctor's easy. Going to the grocery store, easy. But this is the jail cell that you're built in and you live in. And very predictably, right, you're going to spend the last 20, if you're lucky, the last 20 years of your life on pharmaceutical drugs, seeing your doctor every week, believing you're receiving health care, and you just accept the fact this is the normal aging process. Anything that would lead to feeling younger and healthier, like actually being connected to nature and walking, the elements, stressing the body to an extent, being off your phone, all those things will make you feel horrible because you're, in such horrific shape. And so the best thing that, the best aspect of your life is probably watching sports and the nightly cocktail and staying addicted to the food, that the artificial fake food that your brain has become dependent on.
That is chemically developed in a lab for maximum addiction potential.
Yeah. And I understand that this sounds a bit dystopian, right? But this is like the spellbinding effect of the jail cell that you're in, is you don't even know what it's like to be on the other end outside of that jail cell because you haven't experienced freedom in a lot of your life, unfortunately. And we see a boomer generation who has been brought up on CNN and Fox News, conditioned entertainment, fake food, vaccines, and the worst medical care in the entire developed world. And they themselves right now are more disconnected than any generation, unfortunately. But I have hope for a younger generation.
I do too. I have a lot of hope actually for this younger generation, because it's going to be harder to trick them when they realize what they can wake up to. They've seen from a very young age the damage that these things do. They know how damaging it is to have screen time when you're 13 because they did.
Yeah.
They know the impact on relationships when, before you've even years before you've had your first actual intimate partner yourself, you've been exposed to hardcore pornography. They know the consequences of that in a way that prior generations did not.
Well, yeah. I mean, in COVID, what do you get? You close the churches, keep the liquor stores open, and the subscription model for all your entertainment goes through the roof. Boy, we digress, right? Let's go back to your healing journey, your exposure. Like at some point you said, I got to change the way I live.
Yes. So I started to use raw milk, and then I moved quickly to fermented raw milk, which I could only access on the black market, which I was very happy to do. And I began to heal, and I began to heal quickly. My blood pressure started to rise. My heart rate started to go down. I began to be able to walk much longer distances. I was more alert. It was amazing to watch this, to experience this change start. And I'm experiencing this while realizing that the farmer supplying it to me could have his life destroyed for supplying it to me. The thing that is healing me, he could go to jail for. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt
Freedom.
that was wrong.
Home of the free, land of the brave. Yeah. I mean, this is what public school has done to us, right? It's the illusion of freedom. So that bears repeating. All right. And I want to make sure I heard you correct. Can you say that again?
The farmer who is supplying me with the food that has been around for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years, which all of our ancestors prized as the elixir of health. In the Bible, the promised land is described as a land flowing with milk and honey. That was not pasteurized milk, just so we're all clear. There was an awareness that this was a food of health and thriving. Raw kefir is a fermented milk. In the cultures in Eastern Europe that produced this, it was a death penalty offense to reveal the secret of how it was made to rival tribes, because they knew it was the secret to their own health and vitality, to have the means to create such a powerful health-giving product that required no refrigeration and could remain good at room temperature for days.
What impact did it have on your body?
An amazing one. My gut healed, and then my body healed, and my brain healed. So I began to have a level of vitality I had not had since my teens. It was amazing to experience. But I could not get over that fact that the farmer who I knew personally, who was providing this to me illegally, could have his life destroyed for giving me the thing that gave me back my health. So come now to August of 2022. Tucker Carlson has covered this case of an Amish farmer that made the national news. A good friend of mine at the time, or who became a good friend of mine, a guy called Jeremy Lafredo, who was this Canadian independent journalist, brought the story to Tucker, and Tucker was so shocked by it that he aired it on his Fox News show. And it was the story of this Amish farmer, Amos Miller, who was raided by armed federal agents for producing. In that case, it was because he was producing meat that was not done in a USDA plant and therefore not coated in chemicals. And he was doing it because his customers asked him to.
Pause there.
Sure.
Because I'm fairly certain 99% of people listening to this don't understand what you just said.
Okay.
How is meat produced? What do you mean? First of all, who's the USDA? What authorities do they have? And how is our food produced? What are they actually enforcing?
So the USDA is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They manage non-dairy food. They manage meat and grains, all of those things. They came into being after the book The Jungle was written about the meat processing plants in
Upton Sinclair.
Upton Sinclair, and that's the name. And Upton Sinclair said he was aiming for people's hearts and accidentally hit their stomachs when he wrote that book. So he was writing about the farmers who were not Amos Miller. He was not writing about them at all. He was writing about the mega corporations who were producing food on a massive industrial scale with no regard for cleanliness, hygiene, and or their workers, and how horrific the outcomes were. The USDA was put into place because Europe said, we're not letting American food in if that's the way it's being produced. And so the USDA was put into place to, allegedly at the time, it was because they were going to make sure that if you ordered a can of corn, you didn't open it and find kidney beans. That if you ordered pork, you didn't open it and find chicken. It was primarily a labeling agency to make sure the label was accurate. But as tends to happen with government, their role was expanded and expanded and expanded by themselves and by the government agents that put laws in place.
I almost fell off my chair when you said they spray meat. Can you explain that?
Sure. So in order for meat to be sold in the United States, it must, unless it's chicken, and we'll get to that later, or your own cow, or you're buying half a cow. Take those considerations aside. But if you're buying meat in the grocery store, it will have gone through a USDA processing facility. They do not allow you to simply process a cow and sell it. It must be sprayed with chemicals to decontaminate the meat and kill off the microbes on it. On its face, this to me is a little strange because I generally cook my meat, which would also kill those bacteria. But when you consider that the mega slaughterhouses are filthy places with 10,000 animals coming through in a day, where cleanliness is not necessarily a priority, you could see how an argument for this could be made, potentially. But that's very different from one farmer who processes 1 or 2 cows a day in a clean environment. It's a completely different thing. And I've worked in slaughterhouses, so I can tell you it's a very different thing.
What is it that they're spraying?
So they spray different chemicals. Some meat is hit with bleach.
Come on.
Yeah. So some meat is hit with lauric acid, peracetic acid, but a very common one is citric acid. Now, what's wrong with citric acid, right? You'd think that's made from citrus, wouldn't you? Based on its name? No, citric acid is made from GMO corn that is fed to a genetically modified black mold. And then the genetically modified black mold excretes a substance that they call citric acid. It is done in China and then imported into the United States. So this is a Chinese GMO black mold made food additive that is then imported and mandated to be sprayed onto your food.
What effect does it have on the human body?
There are studies showing that it is associated with development of autoimmune disease. Not surprisingly.
What's skyrocketing in the United States?
Black mold allergies and autoimmune diseases. And so black mold byproducts are sprayed on your food. Now, they'll say that the black mold is purified out. And obviously, I don't think it's unreasonable to question whether the industrially processed Chinese food additive is always as purified as they claim it is. And so Amos Miller's customers were very often people with severe health issues who had given up on being able to eat grocery store food because it made them sick and sought him out. It's not convenient to get his food. You can't just go to a grocery store and get it. You know exactly who you're getting it from and you know exactly what it is. And they sought him out specifically because he agreed to make it for them without spraying any chemicals on it, without putting any additives in the milk. A lot of milk has bleach in it. People don't realize that either. You have to keep your milk bacteria count below a certain level. If tester comes in, and I can tell you that there are farmers who will add a little bleach to the milk to knock that count down.
So when I say that there is a war on human nature, pitting us against nature, when we say bacteria, like everyone assumes that this is like bacteria is dangerous. So here, use this antibacterial soap. It's like, boom, automatic conditioned response. Make sure that you don't expose yourself to bacteria, but let's take a leap of faith here and use a little science. Again, 9th grade biology. What does bacteria actually do? Like when we're talking about this, because
literally every process in your body is dependent at some level on it. There's the beneficial bacteria, the ones that your body depends on to digest and process your food. There's commensal bacteria, which are completely harmless or under certain circumstances are beneficial to you. And then there's opportunistic pathogens, which only when they get above a certain level are a threat to you, right? We think of E. coli as so bad. Your gut is full of E. coli. Why are you not sick all the time? It's only when these things go out of balance that you have a problem. What would send them out of balance? Well, what would send them out of balance is not having enough of the beneficial bacteria that you need. What is raw milk full of? Beneficial bacteria.
How'd you get involved in this fight?
So getting back to that. So Amos,
we've kind of buried the lead a little bit.
So Tucker Carlson had covered this story on his show, and my partner at the time said, "Hey, you should watch this. This will interest you." And I did, and it was sitting in my mind for about a week or two. And then one day, I had this very strong compulsion. I've had these compulsions since. This was the first time I would have one of these that was very strong. And it was, get up, go drive to Amos Miller's farm. There's something you need to do to help him. What? Doesn't matter. You'll figure it out. So I get in a car. A friend of my friend Sue is with me. We drive out to his farm. There's this Amish man sitting on the a little cement wall outside his store, hunched over, head in his hands. And I walk up to him and I say, "Are you Amos Miller?" And he says, "Yes, I am." And I said, "Well, you don't know me, but I believe there's something I can do to help you. What do you need?" And he said, "I need a fearless attorney. I don't trust the attorney I have right now to be working in my interests." And the situation Amos was in at this point was he'd been raided by these armed federal agents for producing meat. They'd gone after him for dairy a few years ago, but couldn't get that case to stick to him. We'll get into that later. So then the next thing they did was go after him for his meat. At the time I arrived at his farm, they were trying to add his wife as a co-defendant on the case against him. They were about to seize his farm. He owed $305,000 in fines to the federal government and was facing jail. So the man with his head in his hands that I walked up to, that was his situation. And he told me he needed a fearless attorney. And so I said, I believe I could help him. And I contacted Robert Barnes, who I had been following his work for a while. He'd helped a lot of people in the vaccine injury and the avoiding having to take the COVID shot context. And I asked him, I knew he was someone that would take controversial cases and would take cases where the government was the alleged victim. And so he agreed to take it. And I initially thought, okay, my job is done. I've introduced the guy to a lawyer that can help him. Like we're good to go. Came back to the farm Robert couldn't be there in person. So I came with my cell phone because of course the Amish don't have their own phones. They'd have a little shed where you couldn't, out in the field, or in this case, he had a little shed that was an office with a bunch of other people taking phone calls. It wasn't a good place for a legal meeting. So I said, I'll come back. We'll use my cell phone and you and the attorney can talk. But it was immediately clear that, if there was a Venn diagram of Amish English and attorney English, the way the Amish see the world and the way the attorneys understand the world, they'd be non-overlapping circles. It was very clear immediately that it was going to be very difficult for these two parties to understand each other, not through any ill intent, just because their worlds and their understandings were so different. And so at that moment, I realized I was going to need to stay involved because I come from a background that's similar to the Amish. I understand their culture very well. I have a deep love and respect for them. And they knew the culture I came from, so they respected and trusted me. And I also understood the legal culture well enough to be able to be an intermediary. So the next 2 years of my life were that case.
Some clarification. What law school did you graduate from?
Same as in my medical school. None.
Oh, okay. How did you do this?
Trust. I knew I was called to do it. Remember, I'd made this deal. So I knew I was this was my side of the deal. I was being asked to do this. And so I had total faith that whatever I needed to learn, whatever I needed to do would be clear and I'd be able to do it.
Can I mention one of the psyops that exists in our culture? It's called credentialism, folks. They make you believe that you cannot trust yourself, that you have to rely on an authority. They credential them. What you don't realize is those who are under the credential have to follow their rules. You have to dispense their knowledge. They are not independent. If they were independent, their license gets investigated. My license has been investigated twice because of my work, because of the type of work, because of my outcomes. No, it's because I commit the sin of stepping outside my lane, apparently, the lane that they have created.
How dare you?
Because, a clinical psychologist with a doctoral degree who has been trained at the highest levels to engage in scientific research, who's published scientific research, cannot have an opinion on a psychiatric drug that is being dispensed by nurse practitioners and GPs who have zero training on the research, the science, mental health conditions, right? So this is what they do. Somehow your doctor can prescribe an SSRI. But I, who have thrown years into understanding this at every level, from an investigative level, is not in any way holding the expertise to be able to inform the public. So the psyop is that you, as a free and sovereign citizen, couldn't possibly have knowledge that could support your informed decision-making of your health or that of your child. This is what we've surrendered to. This is what we have given up. And this is what an awakening means to all of us, is you have to be aware of the psychological operations that have been placed upon you since your birth. And that's how you begin to escape the prison that's been provided. Listen, the same psychological operations that have impacted you have impacted me. I'm not saying I'm better than you. I have dedicated my life and created some business operations that exist to get yourself out of the cage, and it's only going to grow from here. But the recognition is that you have to be aware of what they have done to self-imprison you. And you're imprisoned by your own fear. You're imprisoned by your own beliefs. I'm sitting across from somebody who just didn't get that memo, right? Who instead followed a calling and decided to run a legal case. And she has no medical training and she has no law training. So let's get into the details of this, because you had to follow something. Something needed to direct you on how to protect this man who was facing, what was he facing?
He was facing prison, $305,000 in fines. His wife being made a co-defendant in the case, which could leave her vulnerable to prison time too. He had small children at home, and the seizure of his farm.
What was the prosecution? What were the charges and what was supporting their case?
It was contempt of court for refusing to follow the consent decree that he had been trapped into signing by a prior, and a prior attorney. Again, this is where I'd say informed consent. He did not fully grasp what he was signing when he was agreeing to the terms the USDA wanted him to operate under. So what I realized was this wasn't a legal case. This was a political case. These agencies needed a fall man. And the perfect guy for that is an Amish farmer. Why? If you want to set a legal precedent, the Amish are a great group to choose. They're naive to the legal system. They do not interact with it any more than they are forced to, according to their religious doctrine. Their religious doctrine is that you cannot sue another person. You cannot pursue legal action against another person. You stay out of the legal system unless you're dragged into it. So if you want to set a legal precedent, the Amish are your perfect target, because what is the main tool in the legal system that is used to say, no, don't step on me, stay away, you cannot do this? It's a civil rights lawsuit back. And the Amish cannot do that. It is a fight with your hands tied behind your back.
Now, my conspiratorial mind also says there's other precedents involved here, because there's a certain degree of they act as a control group on American society.
I've written about this actually on my Substack and for the Brownstone Institute. I believe I published there as well. And they are a control group in so many ways. They opt out of the mainstream health system. They opt out of the big tech. They opt out of the public school system. They opt out of so many of the ills of modern life. Now, not all of them opt out of big food. Unfortunately, many of them are eating at least as bad as the American diet. But there's a significant portion of them that do not.
They're not vaccinated, correct?
There are some that are, but at a far, far lower level. They're a decentralized church, so each church makes their own decisions. They're not, there is no Amish pope. So some areas will, and you can also, some people confuse the Mennonites and the Amish. But there are some that do vaccinate, but it's a far lower level, and many believe it should not happen at all.
So let me ask you a question then. It exists if we wanted to do the study. If we wanted to understand what the long-term impacts of lifestyle or a vaccinated population, we have the sitting control group, right? Because the psyop that has been inflicted upon all of us since birth was vaccinations are necessary, right? They are the pinnacle of public health. I think the public health authorities are pretty much built upon this vaccination science or this idea.
It's vaccination religion.
Yeah. And so we believe that we would be they eradicated certain diseases, and our lifespan would probably be 50 if we didn't have these vaccines, right? Because that's what you're told.
Right. I mean, this is interesting because across both the public health system, they tend to say, we have a problem. The answer isn't become cleaner, it's add more chemicals. So in the case of the change in the rate of diseases that we are told are because of vaccines, if you look at the changes in public hygiene that happened at the same time, people not drinking contaminated well water, people not living in filth in compressed areas, people having access to clean drinking water, getting out of the factories, being out in the sun, children not being in the factories as well. Those are much stronger candidates for the excellent changes in public health that are contributed, that are attributed to vaccines. But this comes down to the food supply too, because their answer to Upton Sinclair's, what Upton Sinclair identified, which is filthy mega factories producing contaminated food. isn't clean up the factory, clean up the process, provide you with clean food. It's add more chemicals to the dirty food to kill off the things that we deem to be dirty.
This feels spiritual.
This is what they do to
me.
water. They do this to water too, right? The water in that is coming in many city water supplies is just hit with more chemicals to cover up the bacteria in it. But that does nothing about the pharmaceuticals and these other chemicals that are in it. This is done with milk too. Their answer isn't cleaner, it's just add heat. It's like this will gross some people out, but it's completely legal to have a certain amount of pus in milk. You just have to heat the milk and then it's fine. So you can have milk coming from very sick cows into the milk supply, but as long as it's heated, you're fine. When the real answer is have these animals living in alignment with the way that they were designed to live, out on pasture, in clean air, with the grass, the sunshine, and the clean water that they need. Have them come into a milking barn that is small and clean. Have them milked with clean equipment. It doesn't need to be doused in chemicals. It just needs to be cleaned with hydrogen peroxide. And then have that milk drunk by people who are local within the next few days. That just came from the milk from a few cows going to a few people. That's a very safe system. And that's what we lived with for the majority of human history. The reason that raw milk is so threatening to the regulators is that the regulators are controlled by the big producers. The reason that raw milk is so threatening to the big producers is because they cannot safely produce raw milk. How is their system set up? You have an industrial level of cattle. They're not out on pasture. They're in confinement dairies. They are not healthy. They're not getting the sunshine that they necessarily need. In some cases, they may be out in grass. But then you have the milk of maybe 10,000 cows going into a bunch of these trucks you see going down the highway that have the huge tank on the back. That's not the milk of 30 cows. That's the milk of 10,000 cows all mixed together. If you had one cow that's sick, that's now contaminated all of it. Then that milk is trucked 1,000 miles to a mega plant where it's mixed with the milk of tens of thousands of other cows. Then it's heated, which kills off everything that was beneficial as well as anything that was pathogenic from that process. Then it's put into bottles, and then it's shipped out all over the country, and it may be drunk weeks later. What you have there is a dead product. It's white. It looks like milk. It's not. It's a dead product. It's missing everything that is the life force that was in it when it came out of the cow.
And walk around American streets, look at how many people look dead. Let me jump in here because it occurred to me that when you experienced that psilocybin journey in a sensory deprivation tank, that you experienced God not as a judgmental man with a beard, but almost like a love energy, a creator of everything. All life was God. And it occurs to me that we're in a system that is attempting to kill off life. And since we are life and life exists within our bodies, when you kill off that life and the life within our bodies, you get sicker and you get more disconnected from that life force.
This is so true. It's so true. I remember reading a book. It was around the same time that I had this awakening about how, I think it may have been called Connected, but it was about the microbiome and how the vast majority of the cells in our body aren't our own DNA. They're they're microbes that we need to live. They are helping us to digest our food. They are living on our skin. We depend on them. It's a symbiotic relationship. And we've become so blind to this that we think we are at war with nature. When in reality, we need to align with nature and live in a harmonic way, in harmony with it. And raw milk produced properly isn't on an industrial scale. Why? Because animals aren't supposed to live that way. They're supposed to live in small herds with their friends, out on grass, in the sunshine, with clean water, where their calves get the milk they need and they can give the rest to you. And milk produced that way comes from healthier animals. It is healthier. And then it's not trucked across the entire country necessarily. I mean, it could be, but it would have to go directly there, not through a mega processing plant.
I heard a story, a farmer, talking about the experience of their cows when like the winter kind of ends, right? And they become exposed to the fresh new grass.
Mm-hmm.
You're shaking your head, yes, like you've heard this story.
I've actually seen this happen.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So you watch these, we make this huge mistake of thinking of biological beings as being like machines. Cows are sweet creatures. You watch them go out and grass for the first time in the spring, and it's like watching 3-year-olds who are going outside to play for the first time in hours, right? They start jumping. They kick their back legs. They're literally frolicking because they're so excited to be in the grass. You will never convince me animals don't have souls, don't have personalities, don't have consciousness, just as humans do. And that means, think of all the animals that never have that are just in industrial feedlots, that are crammed together, that aren't living the way that they were designed to live. I don't believe for a moment that anything that comes from that animal will be as healthy and good for your body as what comes from an animal that has lived a happy life.
So I think we understand at a more connected and spiritual level why this case is so important. What's next? Tell me what happened. I know this case was in the national media for quite some time.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I knew this was a political case, and one of the reasons I chose Robert Barnes was that he is an excellent at bringing political pressure and political attention to a case rather than just litigating in court. And that light had to be shined on this situation for there to be any pressure to do the right thing. In the end, because Amos had signed a consent decree, it locked him into no longer being able to process his own beef, pork, and chicken. So he didn't have informed consent, but that was something he had signed. If he hadn't signed that, we would have had a much better shot. As it was, he had to send that meat out to be processed, but was allowed to start at least selling that meat again to the meat that he raised himself and sent to a USDA processor. He was allowed to start selling that to his customers again. They had forbidden that. But they always had an eye on him for his dairy. The greatest lie ever told about Amos Miller was that he had killed someone with listeria in 2015 or 16, I believe it was. And that made the national news. If you look him up, you will find that case.
I should intervene here because when I was doing research on you for this particular podcast and I used AI wanted to focus on a woman in Florida who died because of Amos Miller's food.
Yeah. So when I came in to help him, that was still the known story. But I just had a strong feeling there was more to that story. So I started looking into it. And the first thing that was strange was I found out that there was an affidavit from her family members that stated she had never consumed his milk and that she had actually died of advanced lymphoma. That she had been in their house for 3 weeks before she died of advanced lymphoma. She had not consumed the product while she was there, but they had. So this is already seeming a little strange that she then died from his products.
Sounds like a John Grisham novel.
It was the most bizarre thing. So, but I mean, it was literally
but it's not really bizarre. Let's face it, because people listen to this and they say there's always got to be more to the story, because there's no way a prosecutor.
Oh, yes, there is.
Would lie.
Wait till you find out the degree to which they lied. It gets worse.
Okay.
So we now realize we have an affidavit for this, that this woman did not consume the food Well, maybe she snuck to the fridge one day and consumed it. Who knows? Even though she was basically not eating at all because she was dying of cancer. Kept digging. And this is what we discovered. The sample taken from her for listeria was taken months before she moved into that family's home. She lived 500 miles away when that sample was taken. So there was no way she could have possibly been exposed to his food. How could she have? Her family was not yet ordering it. They lived 500 miles away. And she never consumed it or knew of had any exposure to raw milk. She did have listeria due to probably the chemotherapy that she was on, weakening her immune system. But it could not possibly have been pinned on Amos Miller. They had to have known this the entire time because they knew she arrived to her family in the fall and they knew the sample came from June. They lied. They lied to the public. They lied to the prosecutors. They lied to everyone. And if the prosecutors did their job at all, and I believe they did, they would have known this too. So why did this happen? You go back to the fact that the Weston A. Price Foundation did something that really upset the FDA and the CDC. They asked for all the data on all diseases attributed to pasteurized milk, all diseases attributed to unpasteurized milk, and other foods to look at the data and see, is the level of alarm we're having about raw milk legitimate? And what they learned was there was no one in the data who had died from listeria associated with raw milk. You're 30 times more likely to get sick from cantaloupe, 30 times more likely to get sick from oysters. Have we made it illegal to eat raw cantaloupe? Have we made it so that you can only have pasteurized oysters?
No, I go a step further. I get informed consent on raw oysters and any type of uncooked food, right? You see it on the menu.
Right.
Right. And we don't even receive that in our medical centers when it comes to the drugs that they want to give our children or the vaccines they want to be part of the schedule. You get none of that. But if you go into a restaurant, they tell you about consuming raw oysters.
So the Weston A. Price Foundation got this data and published it and said, look, these fears are way overblown. No one has ever died of listeria. Right after that, the government decides to raid a Weston A. Price Foundation conference. And I'll get into who they are in a second because it's worth knowing about this org. They're great. They raid a Weston A. Price Foundation conference where they know raw milk samples are being handed out. And they seize a raw milk sample at this conference. That sample they seize is Amos Miller's. And you will never convince me that that raid was not done in revenge for the Weston A. Price Foundation's publicizing the fact that they were overblowing the risk of listeria and other supposed pathogens, right, in raw milk. So that they took that sample from Amos Miller's food at that conference. They put it in their database. They did alleged whole genome sequencing, matching it to this woman who died. A listeria sample they found in their database, they said it was similar enough to her sample. And they also claimed that there was a man in California who had gotten sick, who had been a customer of Amos Miller's, and that he had gotten sick from it, and that their whole genome sequencing matched it to an Amos product. Well, as you now know, the woman in Florida who died never consumed his products and got sick. And the sample was taken from her months before she was even within 500 miles of an Amos Miller product. So that right there is a blatant, bald-faced, intentional lie on the part of the government agencies. In the case of the man in California who was a known customer of his, remember, you are far more likely to have gotten sick from any of the, to get listeria from any of these other sources. We analyzed the sequence ourselves, had our own experts analyze it, and found a far, far closer match to a pasteurized cheese known listeria outbreak in California where this man lived, as being a much, much closer match to the listeria strain that was taken from his body. If we can find that, they can too. Why didn't they? And this is where you have to get down to the fact that this is not necessarily well-intentioned. at all?
I always ask that question, to physicians, to people in authority. If I can find this information, why don't you? And I think you answered that with the Upton Sinclair quote. But I said before, I mean, this is spiritual. This is dark. It's an anti-life agenda. When you are prosecuting those who are trying to distribute the medicine, not the ones that work against our bodies, the ones that work with our bodies. And you're going to try to convince me that that is not anti-God, anti-life. That's not spiritual. There's not a darkness behind it. Right? We have been so disconnected from the spiritual. We think that all that exists. Right? All we see is physical. This is a very small percentage of actual reality. And we are naive to all the spiritual forces, the genetic or the energetic aspects of our physical reality. Right?
When people talk about like, well, maybe there are microbes on this meat. Maybe this maybe we should be spraying it. What you should really be looking at is the farmer whose meat is only getting grass fed out in the sunshine really the problem? Or do you have any idea what the rest of the meat that you get in the grocery store, what's inside that? Sure, it's been sprayed with a chemical and it may have a lower bacterial count. I'll actually challenge that too, that it does. But what did that meat actually eat? And there's a great book by my friend Joel Salatin.
What did the cow eat?
Right. What did the cow eat that is in the meat that you're eating?
Yeah.
So there's a great book by my friend Joel Salatin called Everything I Want to Do is Illegal. And it's the perspective of a small farmer dealing with these agencies who stop you at every turn. And he'll very happily tell you that a lot of these farms are feeding literal trash and feces to their cows. Cows can be fed chicken manure because it has a high enough protein content. Think how desperate that cow's got to be, by the way, for it to agree to eat that. Others are being fed things like candy that didn't sell that's ground up with the wrapper on it.
They're literally full of shit.
Yeah.
Which is like the narrative will say you are.
Sure.
Right? Like when you start presenting this kind of evidence against the narrative.
Exactly. And I would recommend anyone who's interested in this, go read Everything I Want to Do is Illegal by Joel Salatin. Watch, there's some excellent documentaries where they will show these scientists with, a cow with the stomach opened. This poor cow is there, the stomach open, and they're watching how it can digest all these different things. And they're managing to break it down. So this is fine. That is fine. Remember, think about the fact we live in a food system where feeding a cow garbage and feces is fine as long as you then coat their meat with enough chemicals that we think the bacteria count is low enough. But feed a cow right. Feed it nothing but organic grass, have it out in the sunshine and have it processed where it's the only cow processed in a day in a clean facility. And that meat is then distributed to customers and its bacteria count isn't high. And even if it was, they're going to either cook it or if they don't, that's their informed choice. That's the person we're targeting.
What happened with this case?
So the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture went ahead and raided him as well in January 4th, 2024.
What does a raid look like? Obviously, these are probably people in, shirt and ties. They work for the Department of Agriculture. They come in.
Yeah, I wasn't present at the armed federal agents raid. In the case of the raid where he was, so there was a raid on him by armed U.S. Marshals when he was not complying with the USDA. And that was in, I believe it was maybe March of 2022. I was not involved yet when that occurred.
Okay.
But when I was present when he was raided on January 4th, 2024. And I managed to get some local independent media on site to start filming what was happening. Agents were Agents showed up with police escort and demanded entry. They claimed that two kids or two people had gotten sick with E. coli. There's dispute over whether that happened. And I can get into why them just claiming this happened doesn't necessarily mean that it occurred.
Yeah.
But that was their claim. So they came in, they arrested all his food, which is a thing you can apparently do. Stick a sticker on the door saying all this food is arrested. They're actually required to put a sticker on every single item, but they were too lazy to do that. So they stuck a sticker on a few items, then stuck a sticker on the door, said everything's arrested. And they then asked him to voluntarily stop selling any food, selling any dairy, so they could test it to see if they could find pathogens in it. He did voluntarily stop while they could do some testing. What they then did was they went to the court in what's called an ex parte filing, which means they do it in secret behind closed doors where the defense does not know it's occurring.
Wait, how's that legal?
Great question, but it is. So the standards for it is that it has to be such a high risk, such an emergency situation that the court should put a preliminary injunction in place before the defense even knows that it's an issue. And what they insinuated to the court was that it was an emergency because he was still selling food and could hurt other people, knowing full well that he had stopped selling it voluntarily for during this time to allow for an investigation. So again, they were lying. And so now his customers all over the country, he has what are called food clubs, where people all over the country buy food from him, and then he and his employees package it, stick it in a refrigerated truck. It drives overnight to a place. The people come, they get their box, and they take it home. That's inconvenient. It's not cheaper than the grocery store, and it's inconvenient enough. You got to be trying to get it. If you were to get sick, you'd know exactly what farm was responsible, right? And I want to just take a little sidebar here. When they claim someone got sick, here are some of the ways that they can fudge that data. One, you got sick and you drank raw milk does not mean that you got sick from the raw milk. Did you have oysters? Did you have cantaloupe? Did you have spinach? Did you have dairy, a pasteurized dairy that was infected? Did you have any of these other things?
People get sick all the time.
Exactly. So what they will then do is one of the first questions they ask was, have you consumed raw milk recently? That's one of the key questions they ask you. And if they have, they will test the container that you have in your fridge.
Never asked if you got a flu vaccine or anything.
No, that somehow doesn't come up. So they'll test your container in the fridge. They're not testing your cantaloupe or your spinach. They're not testing the oysters that you got at a restaurant recently. They're not testing any of that. They're just going to test your raw milk product because in their minds, that's the culprit. Now, let's say you are actively sick. How many of us go to the fridge and just drink our milk straight out of the carton? I will admit that I do. Like if I had a kefir or milk, I sometimes just want some, I go drink it. So let's say you actively are really ill. You are infected with something and you went and drank it. Okay, now you've put that into the container. They will not consider that as a possible method. They should be going back and testing something from the same batch. They don't do that. They just test the container you drank out of. So you're already getting false positives there. But they're not testing anything else. If they decide raw milk is the culprit, they're not going to test anything else in your life. So there's a lot of false positives that likely occur that way.
It almost sounds like they want to eliminate the most healthy, the most bioavailable, most nutritious
It does
foods.
seem that
and
is the case.
Yeah, they want to be able to eliminate it, if not first through social engineering and propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
They want to make it as difficult as possible for you to obtain it.
Well, and the other crazy part is the more fat it has in the less likely it is to have any pathogen. So
this is a whole nother podcast on the fat-free craze and push throughout our country.
Here in Pennsylvania, raw milk under certain circumstances is legal, but raw kefir, raw yogurt, raw heavy cream, and raw butter are not.
Because that makes sense.
Yeah,
that's extremely logical.
And it's simply the swipe of a pen by the ag secretary is the reason that is the case. What's funny about that is that the least likely thing to have any pathogen in it would be the butter because it's just butter fat. The higher the butter, and the more something is fermented, the less likely it is to have an issue. So all the fermented products and all the high fat content products are illegal.
Also, a little sidebar here. I've consulted with physicians who are in this alternative space, right? Who are treating patients who've been dependent on psychiatric drugs or trying to heal their body from that, as well as exposure to other toxins. And since I can't speak out of line because I'm just a lowly clinical psychologist who can't read, these doctors have told me, right, that there's a couple things that act on the body to allow to expel some of these toxins, right? Like right now we're drinking out of plastics. Don't like to do this, but if convenience, we are exposed to some of these BPAs, these chemicals, right, that are not good for the human body. But fat and fermented foods help detox us from the damage that we do.
Right.
And they make it illegal for us to use the foods that are going to help detox from the poison that they mandate on our culture.
Yeah. It's baffling at best. So in Amos's case,
can I make a statement here?
Go ahead.
Because I just like to use the reason and logic, and it's my biggest flaw. We have this system where our entertainment is our political system, that we pit the Democrats and the Republicans against us. So in some degrees, it's almost like those who enslave us with the laws, right? We will argue over who the better slave owner is, right? And think that if our slave owner is in office, then we're not going to be poisoned. We're going to be more free. We're going to solve all the problems that they created.
Yeah.
Right. We are insane.
Yeah. It's, I no longer believe the political solution is ever going to be the solution to anything. But that's another story for another time.
That is another time. I just wanted to point out the irony.
So in Amos's case, they shut him down, and now there were customers of his all over the country who needed his food for their health, who were seeking it out inconveniently because they were getting sick eating grocery store food, and they could no longer get it. And they had put this preliminary injunction on him that he could not sell it before he had any chance to present any evidence of any kind. And that preliminary injunction could have gone on for years. So we had a hearing coming up to try to get that preliminary injunction lifted. And I found customers of his. I asked them to reach out to me and tell me why they needed the food and if they had medical records backing it up. And I found some really interesting cases. I found a woman with mast cell activation syndrome who was essentially housebound because she had anaphylactic reactions to almost everything. And she was using unpasteurized colostrum from his cows to manage it when nothing else would manage her illness. And when she lost access to it, it was life-threatening for her. Now, that's an illegal product. Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, even if Amos was fully in compliance in every way, he would not be allowed to sell that product that this woman depended on to live. And then there was a woman in Florida, lovely lady. I actually got to know her after this, sweet person. And she had ulcerative colitis so severe that her colon was becoming necrotic. She was put on a drug, a standard treatment for this that caused her to start to go into liver failure. And she had then, so this is a year or two before this, she had then found out about Amos's food and learned that some people tried treating this with raw kefir instead. Again, a product that even if Amos was fully in compliance, the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture would not allow him to make. So she started buying this raw kefir from him and consuming it. And she was able to get off the drug that was causing her to have liver failure. We had prior colonoscopy records and colonoscopy records after she started consuming his food. And they were night and day different. We had all the doctor records backing this up. okay, well, maybe there was some other factor contributing to this. No. After he was shut down and she could no longer get the food from him, she had to go back on that drug. Her liver started to fail again. And she had another colonoscopy showing the disease was coming back. So the rock of fear for her was a treatment far superior in its effect on her colon to the standard pharmaceutical treatment. And it wasn't killing her liver in the process. So the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture had declared themselves the judge, jury, and executioner for this woman and for the woman with mast cell activation syndrome. And we presented all of this to the judge and said, is it fair for these women to be deprived of this, what for them is a life, is required for the maintenance of their lives so they do not die? Is it fair to deprive them of that on the basis of a preliminary injunction before any evidence has been presented that could go on for years? And thank goodness the judge was able to hear that. And he came to a decision that is potentially a huge win in this case. The case is ongoing, but what he said was that the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture does not have a right, before any evidence is presented, to shut down Amos's right to sell food outside of Pennsylvania. So the judge kept in place that he could not sell dairy products to Pennsylvanians, but not to people outside the state. And that is a Commerce Clause ruling for the nerds out there who also may or may not have law degrees. It was a game changer. So as it stands, they still want to shut Amos down. The Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. He still is facing a trial at some point in the future. But what they lost was putting him out of business without a trial ever happening. Because this is now, we're 2.5 years after that raid. What they wanted was that preliminary injunction with no evidence presented to be in place still today. Would he still be in business 2.5 years after they'd forbidden him to sell his products? Obviously not. And so that is where it's a very dirty legal trick to destroy him and to destroy a farm before they've ever had a chance to bring any evidence in court. And that is what I believe they anticipated happening. And he's far from the only farmer. I worked with other farmers who were going through similar things. There is a war on these small farms. And the other piece that people don't think about is, why would the big dairy producers hate this so much? The raw milk. It's not just that they cannot safely produce raw milk themselves. If you're a small farm, your only option, if you're not a raw milk farm, is to sell your milk to a large dairy co-op, which is a nice word for being a feudal serf of a mega corporation. And there is a mandated amount that they will buy your milk from, and it's often $1.15, maybe $2 a gallon. You can sustain maybe just above poverty level as a farmer. Many of these farms are going out of business. In Pennsylvania, I think 60% of dairy farms have shut down in the last 15 years.
But I have a question, because when I went to public school, they told me we were in a free market capitalistic system. And it was a democratic system as well, a constitutional republic.
Yeah. That might be one of the reasons I have a problem with the public school system as well, because it turns out that what you learn isn't necessarily what's actually happening. We know we live in an oligopoly or an oligarchy, and that is run by bureaucrat. And so,
but clearly, if the price is being controlled by the U.S. government, right? How is that different from a Soviet system?
It's not. And in the case of the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, the agriculture secretary is the co-owner of one of these large dairy co-ops, where he is personally financially benefits from raw milk farming not being a great
I thought that was restricted to the FDA. I thought they were the only ones who could have those conflicts of interest.
No, it's the same. It comes down to the state level as well. And so if you're a small dairy farmer, if raw milk is perfectly allowable, you can get your neighbors to pay up to $16 a gallon for your milk if you are farming in a way that is organic, good for the environment, healthy.
Can I intervene with more psyops?
Mm.
Okay. we've been so conditioned and enslaved that we think we'll fight for quote unquote good healthcare, right? That we'll still pay deductibles, thousands, 3, 5, 10,000 deductibles for this healthcare system when, and you will not invest in food as medicine that will prevent you from ever having to use that healthcare system. The U.S. population is being indebted by healthcare costs, and they think it should be some human right that you have health insurance when you're not focused on the fact that your body can heal if you treat your body with real medicine. Where are you investing your finances, Americans? Listen, this is not going to be a podcast that in any way is blaming the victim, since we've distributed wealth to such an extent that 1% hold the majority of wealth. But the wealth that we do have, right? We do and have been enslaved to put that money, that finite resource, into things that aren't going to yield any productive investment or return on investment to our own health and well-being, right? So you just look at the money that goes into our cell phones, into our technology, into our entertainment, and into our other materials that we try to produce, like new clothing constantly to be in fashion, into a certain type of car that we want to buy. Whatever it is about that fake presentation to put out to the world that we are rich, right? What actually makes a person rich is their health. The most important aspect of this. And we don't invest in our health, and then we pay for it down the line. And it's definitely the second half of your life, but you're seeing that's creeping down lower and lower and lower,
Yeah.
that younger people are sick now.
It's so true. I mean, when people say like it seems really expensive to eat healthy. Yeah, but how much are you losing in quality of life? And in straight dollar value.
And there's economics around this too. It's a lie, we've been taught that, health is eating 3 meals a day and 2 snacks. That's not how human bodies flourish. Number one, like the body needs a break from digestion. So when you start to eat the nutrient-dense bioavailable foods that are heavy in fat, what happens then? Because I know that in order for you to heal your body, you got to move to a specific diet. What happens when you start ingesting more fat?
There can be an adjustment period for your body to that, but ultimately your body runs far more efficiently. And I eat maybe twice a day.
Yeah.
I will sometimes eat just once a day. And I only eat when I become hungry. And the rest of the time my body is operating incredibly well because it's not focusing all its energy on digestion.
Yeah.
On trying to digest things that it wasn't designed to digest.
People don't even understand hunger cues anymore because what they're responding to is either a blood sugar drop because of the over-reliance on sugars and carbs, often them synthetic, and the bioengineered food that's acting on the brain that gives you a quick dopamine hit, right?
Sure.
And a little bit of a high, and then you feel like shit like an hour or two later, and you think you're hungry again, and then you need that food again.
Yeah.
So this is what happens is it's the illusion that, we have this cheap food, but you ingest that, you spend more because you're eating frequently, eating more conveniently, and then you pay for it on the other end of your life. But when you eat a diet that's natural, like fats, like cream and dairy and grass-fed beef, you're satiated. And your body is running more efficiently. And what happens is when you eat once or twice a day, you wake up in the morning, you don't need a breakfast because you're not feeling that crash. Your body has gone through the natural fasting that occurred when you were sleeping, but then it continues itself into the day. Before you know it, you've gone 16 hours without desiring food. The American system would say you're doing a specific diet called intermittent fasting. I would say that's you being more aligned with what is naturally occurring. It's just being human, but
Right.
You've been so conditioned to have to, support like Nabisco and who's ever creating breakfast cereals. We've become disconnected from the natural rhythms of life.
Exactly. Yeah. And I would say I eat around noon and then maybe a smaller meal later in the day. And often those meals are still small. I just eat basically, protein and a lot of fat. And I'm far, far healthier this way. I did want to get back, though, to just finishing that story on the dairy industry, because I think it's really important people understand this. The raw milk revolution is a major threat to industrialized dairies, the mega companies that own them, and the individuals that own them. Because we have a feudal serfdom system when it comes to the dairy industry in this country. We have small farms whose only option is to sell their milk at set low prices to a conglomerate where it's then pasteurized, bottled, etc. If it was truly, if the hurdles were not in place for them to instead choose to farm in full alignment with the land organically, where their cows were really well cared for, and their neighbors could then choose to buy the raw milk from them at between $10 and $16 a gallon is typically the going rate. Think how that would be for that farmer. You could get $1.15, $2 for a gallon, or you could get $10 to $16 a gallon. It's exiting the slave system of the corporate dairy industry. And so the raw milk revolution of selling your milk directly to your neighbor, unpasteurized, made cleanly, with informed consent, is a major threat to major corporations. And in the case of the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, Russell Redding, the ag secretary, is the owner of one of these dairy co-ops, the co-owner of it, that benefits from these farmers not having these raw milk farms. And he's the one whose pen decides that they can't sell raw butter, raw heavy cream, raw kefir. And you won't convince me that it doesn't occur to him that hundreds of thousands of dollars in his bank account benefit from him deciding that they can't sell it.
Yeah, I think there was a time that would be enough for a revolution.
Well, 3% tax on tea caused revolution before.
Yeah.
We've become so comfortable in our cages.
We have.
Our cages of convenience. And I love this line that, sovereignty, privacy, freedom, these are all muscles that we need to exercise, or they become soft. And convenience is how we become soft.
And we're soft. Yeah. What's next for you?
I've done a lot of work with these Amish farmers. I did some other legal work after that, protecting other people the U.S. government was going after. But what I think I'm going to do next is tell more stories like this, help people find their way out of the cages we're in, help people see where convenience has made them their own willing jailer. And I think that may best be done through a podcast.
This is a radically genuine conversation, and you're very radically genuine. But I just a podcast is not enough, right?
No, it's not.
Let's think bigger.
An in-person show and a media platform that is dedicated to bringing light to the darkness and helping people find their own inner compass, their own inner truth, and finding their way to human flourishing and freedom. That's what I want to do next, and that's what I'm going to do next. I think I'm going to do it with you.
This is our reveal that the Radically Genuine podcast is evolving. You're probably listening to this around July 4th.
The 250th anniversary of one of the most powerful documents ever written, where a group of men risking their lives decided we are not going to take the convenience of being slaves to a monarchy anymore, and we will risk everything to see a life of true freedom for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren. And they wrote one of the most powerful documents in all of human history. I challenge anyone, if you're hearing this around July 4th, go actually read it. Feel the power, the energy behind their words. Consider what these men were risking. They were willing to give everything for freedom, and they believed they would win. And that is why they did.
Folks, you're listening to my new co-host. We plan on launching this show, God willing, potentially September. So you will continue to hear me, listen to me up until the launch of this studio show. And there won't be anything like it. To the extent right now that much of the media landscape is still controlled, because this is what happens when you are controlled by advertisers, that when you get too big, then you are subjected to the influence of government, of narratives. We're going to be shining a light on things that you're not aware of, but we're going to move you out of that back to a place where you're going to feel, again, connected to what is your inner compass, what is guiding you, that we just became too distracted and too brainwashed to pay attention to. When we talk about a media platform, it's more than just a Radically Genuine podcast. That's important. We're going to fly in experts that you never heard of to enter into long-form discussions. But then we're going to create short films and documentaries so you can be armed with the information that is outside of the matrix. We're going to push ourselves into the matrix with everything we have to try to influence that. And trust me, we're all very much controlled by algorithms, financial dollars, large corporations. What they are doing is they are creating a story for you to live by. They're using technology to be able to shape that further. They're stealing your data, and they are using that for psychological manipulation.
Yes.
What we're going to do is we're going to help you exit that system, but we're going to return to health, freedom, sovereignty, and to understand that you are a spiritual being and you're not a machine. And we are entering into the greatest battle of human history, which is humans versus machines. We're already falling behind in that war because of our supercomputers and our technology and our convenience. And there are people that are running this world who believe they are God. They are transhumanists. They certainly do believe that they can extend lifetime, they can be eternal, and they can merge human beings with machines. It sounds so dystopian. And I think even 5-6 years ago, I would have sounded crazy on this. But this isn't going to be for conspiracy theorists. This is going to be for humanists.
Yes.
Realists. And it's not for those who are afraid.
No.
Right? This is going to be people who want to live a life of courage and love and purpose. And it's a special group. By no means do we believe that we're going to wake up everybody, right? But those who are naturally inspirited and designed to think independently, who love and care for their children, who are acutely aware of the disconnection that we have to each other and to God, will be naturally drawn to RadGen Media, and we will become the voice of the awakening. I believe that you get a sense of who Tracy is as far as an angel warrior. And we're guided much more here by a spiritual, energetic desire for truth and to support freedom. By no means in any way are we telling you, come follow us.
No.
We're opening the door. We're going to give the keys to unlock the prison. The door is going to be open. It's kind of the allegory of the cave type scenario. We're going to just try to tilt your attention away from the illusion and the entertainment and the poison and say, hey, there's a path here towards freedom. Just follow the light a little bit. We're going there. You can come with us or you don't have to come with us, but there is a direction.
And it's all about finding your own inner compass, finding your own way. I never want anyone to follow me anywhere. I want you to find the compass in your own heart and find your own way out to freedom. And that deal I made about devoting the rest of my life to do this for human freedom and flourishing, the continuation of this show and RadGen Media is the next step in the deal that I made.
You and I made the same deal, and we ended up in the same place.
We did.
I want to thank you, Tracy Thurman, for a radically genuine conversation.
The first of many.